I want to share with you and bring your attention to this concept called deliberate practice. I want you to also understand the difference between deliberate practice and our core daily habits, because there is a difference. And the reason why you want to know the difference is because without deliberate practice, even if you observe solid, good daily habits, your basic habits, you actually still won't see massive progress in your life. You need both. Let me explain. Your daily habits, good, solid, daily solid habits, could be things like working out every day, tracking your nutrition, your macros, reading every day and learning, right? Drinking plenty of water. Take a program like 75 Hard, which I've done now 5 times. I'll be doing it again soon. It's now an annual thing for me. The focus of 75 Hard is to build mental toughness and to build grit and to build a version of yourself that does what you say you're going to do, even when you really don't feel like doing it. That skill, that is a skill, by the way, it's a perishable skill. If you're constantly working on building your grit, your mental toughness, your fortitude, it'll be stronger. Just like going to the gym and building your muscles versus not going to the gym and losing your muscles. Now, what you need, that grit, that fortitude, that willingness to do what you said you were going to do long after the feeling of doing it has passed, you need that for deliberate practice. Just doing 75 Hard, as an example, in and of itself, isn't going to add $1 million to your bank account. It isn't going to build you a really powerful human network. It isn't going to take your business to the next level, right? It isn't going to necessarily improve your relationships. Yet who you become in the process of sticking to a set of core daily habits builds up the muscle, the version of you, and the skills you need in terms of grit, mental toughness, to then go after deliberate practice. Are you with me? Because if you look at, again, as an example, if you look at 75 Hard as a set of daily habits, there's 5 of them, right? These are all things that are good, solid daily habits. And depending on the level of your mental toughness, doing 75 Hard may or may not be hard for you, right? If you've never done something like that, it's really hard. Good. You're building up that version of yourself that can go after deliberate practice properly, which I'll explain in a second. And let's say you do 75 Hard and it's not very hard for you anymore mentally, but it is uncomfortable and it locks you in. Good, you're maintaining and building that mental toughness muscle. Now, what is deliberate practice? The way I understand deliberate practice, and there are actual researchers, leading thought leaders on this concept of deliberate practice. Their names are now, I'm blanking on for the purpose of this video. It's Christmas Day. I'm just adhering to my commitment of making a daily video. So this is off the top of my head, just from life itself. Deliberate practice is when you put yourself into a zone going after a goal that is way out of your comfort zone. It is where you are stepping out way past where your current level of success is, your current skill level is, where your comfort zone is. You're setting yourself up to basically intentionally fail, but fail forward as being your future self. Dr. Benjamin Hardy writes about this in one of his books in reference to, I believe it's Josh Waitzkin, if I'm pronouncing him correctly. Josh is the subject of the movie In Search of Bobby Fischer. He was one of the youngest, or maybe the youngest chess grandmaster ever. Then he went on to be a champion or a 2-time champion in Tai Chi push hands. Then he went on to be, I believe, a champion in a circuit with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, if I'm not mistaken. The point is that Josh is somebody who constantly gets to the pinnacle of multiple disciplines and practices. And he wrote a book called The Art of Learning, which I thumbed through or read, can't remember which one, many years ago when I first heard about Josh on Tim Ferriss's podcast. I even think I have that book somewhere in all my books. I should pick it up and read it. But one thing that Josh talks about is he picks one niche thing as a skill within the overall discipline he's trying to pursue, and he focuses on getting to and mastering that one minor skill that is a stepping stone to the ultimate goal and outcome. Okay? And so what happens is that you start deliberately practicing towards mastering something that right now you know little to nothing about, so that it is above your current skill level, outside of your current comfort zone. And the key here in terms of understanding the distinction between deliberate practice and our habits is, and this Dr. Benjamin Hardy writes really well about this, our habits have automaticity to them. They're automatic, like tying your shoe, driving, riding a bike. You don't think about it. You just do it because you're so congruent with it that it's literally automatic for you. Automaticity. Deliberate practice is like when you went to learn how to drive for the first time. Every single component of learning how to drive was absolutely what? Brand new to you. It was completely above your skill level and outside your comfort zone. Are you with me? So every component of learning how to drive took what? Conscious effort, mindful awareness of every little thing, because it was all new. Same thing with riding a bike. Right now, today, it's a habit because you are so congruent with it that you literally have automaticity around it. When you first started learning how to ride a bike, every second of it was conscious awareness and deliberate practice, because it was what? Above your current skill level and outside your current comfort zone. Are you with me? Now, what happens is that with enough deliberate practice and mastery of new things that are above our current skill level and outside of our comfort zone, eventually they spill over into the habit bucket, automaticity. And we no longer even have to think about them when we do them. Tying our shoes, riding a bike, driving a car. You dig? So now think about this. You could have great school. Let's say you learn how to drive at 16, 17, whatever your age was. You could have had great solid habits with fitness at 16 years old, doing your school work and homework, etc., etc., etc. None of those good habits would help you to grow in learning how to drive a car. You'd have to go deliberately practice how to drive the car, driving a car, to actually learn how to drive a car. Are you with me? So same thing nowadays. Adhering to a set of solid, good daily habits and structure is critical and fundamental to maintaining and building the overall person that has the mental fortitude, the mental toughness, the grit to stick with things even when you don't feel like doing them, because you need that skill and that strength to stick with deliberate practice things when you're constantly getting knocked on your ass. Okay? One of the things that Dr. Benjamin Hardy writes about in reference to and in context of Josh Waitzkin is Josh would constantly practice the martial art that he was going after. I believe it was Tai Chi push hands. He was constantly practicing it against an opponent that was 200 or so pounds. Josh's waist lighter and smaller. And Josh kept getting his butt kicked. But he kept practicing. He kept practicing deliberately with this opponent who was above his skill level, outside of his comfort zone. All right? And that is one of Josh's strategies, is put yourself, when you're going after something, a new goal, a new outcome, You need to constantly put yourself into a zone where to win, you would need to have a higher skill level than you have now. And what you're doing definitely puts you outside your comfort zone. And are you seeing the patterns? Whether it's learning how to tie your shoes for the first time. Today it's automatic. Once upon a time, it took all your brain power and focus. Learning how to ride a bike. Today it's automatic. Once upon a time, all your brain power. Same thing with driving a car. For Josh with Tai Chi, right? And combat sports. If you think about anything that you're good at now, today, as an adult, that you don't even think about, try to remember the first time you ever tried to do it. You were probably really awkward, slow, sucked, because by nature, by default, having never done the thing before, there's a steep learning curve. I shared this with you for this purpose. As you're planning out your life, 2025 and beyond, I see a lot of men stick to very solid daily, weekly habits, good habits, structure, but while they're building up some mental toughness, some mental fortitude, some grit, they're not applying it at the same time over into the deliberate practice bucket. While sticking to and adhering to solid habits, they're not pushing themselves also out of their comfort zone. And so you can be very structured, have great habits that are completely built around your comfort zones and at your current skill level. So the only thing that you're doing is maintaining your capacity for mental toughness, grit, fortitude, but you're not actually applying it in a quadrant where it will create growth in skill and bigger comfort zones. That's why, and maybe you can relate, you can meet a lot of men who are practitioners to one degree or another of personal development principles and habits, yet their life doesn't reflect consistent progressive growth and elevation. Why? They have built an altar around comfort zones at some point and pulled back on a willingness to fail. And failure is the price that you will always have to pay in order to elevate your skill level and expand your comfort zones, and AKA to become a bigger, better, bolder, more successful version of yourself, to unlock the greatest version of yourself. You cannot turn the key to the door of opening the door to your greatest self without failure. So how we think of failure has to be redefined. If you're just taking random shots in the dark, at least if that's how you feel, then it's going to feel like failure and it's going to feel painful. But if you have a crystal clear North Star, a target, a goal that you're moving towards, learning how to tie my shoes, crystal clear goal. Learning how to ride a bike, crystal clear goal. Learning how to drive a car, crystal clear goal. Learning Tai Chi push hands, crystal clear goal. If you have a crystal clear goal, now stick with your solid daily, weekly structure and habits to keep that mental grit muscle strong, and then apply it to the deliberate practice of whatever it is that's above your current skill level and outside your current comfort zone within context and correlation to the North Star, AKA the big goal you want to accomplish. That is your big goal. Therefore, you haven't accomplished that thing yet. Now, when you're constantly getting knocked on your butt, falling off the bicycle, slamming the brakes too hard, accelerating too fast, you're still in the parking lot, you're not out on the streets in the car. When you're going through those things, you don't feel as much of a failure as much as you say, all right, time for another attempt, time for another attempt, time for another attempt, until what happens? Like with tying your shoes, riding a bike, driving a car, learning martial arts, you start to kind of figure this shit out. And what happens? Your skill level starts to rise, and your comfort zone, that the line that was out used to be out way outside your comfort zone, begins to move a little bit closer to you, and you become more comfortable with it. Until one day, this deliberate practice is now automaticity. I'll wrap up with this as a personal example. One of the biggest breakthroughs I had for myself financially as a tactical skill, which then fits into an overall strategy, is doing webinar sales. So learning how to put together a solid webinar presentation, getting people to it, and then presenting it and making an offer in such a way that it gets a strong percentage, a decent percentage of people to actually buy whatever it is that I'm offering on the webinar. Fundamentally, it means I can sell one to many, which is massive scale. And for 3 or 4 years, once I started tackling webinars, I stayed in my comfort zone around how to do sales, how to put together webinars, how to do presentations. I didn't put myself into any sort of quadrant that was above my current skill level and outside of my comfort zone, meaning I kept trying to do presentations in a way that would knowing now with the knowledge I have, would absolutely never work to make a sale. All they did was they worked to educate people. Because up until that point in time, content that I would put together for presentations was always and only for just simply educating and teaching. And I wasn't learning any sort of concepts or skills or frameworks or strategies for how to make offers and then how to sell on a webinar, etc. And for 3 or 4 years, I made zero, and I do mean zero, sales on webinars in multiple industries with multiple clients. I had a consulting agency at the time. And then one day I said, okay, you know what? I am going to actually just start doing what I got to do. I'll fail, but I'll learn a bunch of new things, because guess what? For 3-4 years now, I haven't been successfully making any sales with webinars. So it's not like now magically the next time I do the same thing, it's going to work. Hey, that's not going to work, right? What's the definition of insanity? Trying the same thing over and over and over again, expecting different results, right? What's the other version and way of saying that? The thinking that got you here won't get you there. So I dove head first specifically into Russell Brunson's teaching on the perfect webinar, I think is what it was called. And it was very awkward, different, new, skill level, comfort zone, right? I felt like scared to do it because I felt like I was just going to be selling, right? I had so many limiting beliefs and mental blocks to it. However, after some procrastination, but overall continued deliberate practice, I had 2 attempts at doing the webinars with that new style. I intentionally half-assed it and tried to hybrid it together, thinking I'm clever. Didn't work. Then I went for it, full on Russell Brunson's formula on doing a perfect webinar. And I remember that webinar to this day because I was sweating, like my armpits were sweaty doing the webinar. I'm not even on camera, but I just feel like this is absolutely going to bomb the whole time. And I remember at the end doing the pitch and the offer, which if you're familiar at all with that, with Russell Brunson's approach, you're basically sound like an infomercial guy at the end of the webinar, right? And you're going to get this, and you're going to get that. Oh, but wait, blah, 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 blah. And I was like, nobody's going to buy. Webinar ends. I wasn't even daring to look at the shopping cart or anything like that. And this was for a client. I was just doing the webinar for them. And then I feel like I probably waited at least 10 minutes to work up the nerve to go look into my customers' sales software to see if we'd gotten any enrollments. And that customer was averaging at that time, I think about $25,000 to $30,000 a month in his business. And that first webinar did $13,354, which if you correlate it to his ongoing revenue, that's about 50% growth in 1 month on his revenue. He's very happy. I looked at that software and refreshed it so many times, not believing my eyes, thinking what? did I really do this much in sales in 90 minutes? After so many years of not getting any sales with webinars. Obviously the euphoria, blah, 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 et cetera, that hit me after that was amazing. And of course, then after that, with that success, I went so all in into absolutely mastering anything that I could about learning all of Russell Brunson's webinar stuff, how to do webinars, anybody related to Russell Brunson, any of his successful students and his people in his masterminds. And for about, I want to say 3 more years, I only did webinars Russell Brunson style. They were successful. So there's an example of where I went from deliberate practice, went from habits and not making any sales for 3 years to deliberate practice, failing, and then suddenly succeeding, and then turn that deliberate practice into where I could create from scratch and then deliver and pitch and make an offer one of a webinar using Russell Brunson's framework with automaticity. Then I got into doing some what's called high ticket sales for my agency. And this webinar framework wasn't pulling as well. But knowing my lesson from before, I didn't wait as long this time to look at other different webinar formats. Now I went after deliberate practice for different styles of webinars much more quickly, much more aggressively, much more intentionally, knowing what happened before, right? How long I didn't make sales, not having the right framework, and then how quickly I made sales and how much I sold once I had a good proven framework. And then in short order, in about 6 months, I was absolutely crushing it at high ticket sales for myself. Within a couple months after that, that deliberate practice became automaticity. Nowadays, I can look at a product or program that I or a client of mine wants to sell. I can identify the kind of customer they're going to be selling to. And without having to reference books, without having to do anything, my level of automaticity around that is I can sit down and put together a winning webinar in probably about 3 hours on average. The one caveat is if I already have some subject matter expertise or knowledge of the industry. If not, I have to put in some research on the industry first. But by and large, I can put together a well-converting webinar within 3 hours and then deliver it and make, on average, between 13 to 20% conversion on that webinar. 20% is a lot. 13% is good. Give me a few optimizations and it'll be at 17 to 23%. I'm really good at webinars. How? Deliberate practice combined with habits and structure that maintain and keep building mental fortitude, mental grit, and so forth. And then making sure I apply them to a deliberate practice that takes me to the next level in my skill and my comfort zone. You must constantly put yourself into an arena and a quadrant where you're reaching for something that's above your current skill set and outside your current comfort zone. And you're using the foundation of your daily and weekly habits to keep intact that person with who has the mental toughness and the mental fortitude and grit to stay in that quadrant of constantly failing, as long as you have a clear North Star to get to focus on. So as you plan out your goals and your dreams and your aspirations for 2025, address what kind of habits you're going to keep on a daily and weekly basis. Also identify where you're going to apply intentional, deliberate practice with the understanding that you're intentionally putting yourself into a quadrant there where you're below your current skill level and outside of your current comfort zone, so that just like with learning how to tie your shoes, ride a bike, drive a car, or martial arts, or me with webinars, you're going to initially fail because it's new, but the failure is just learning the skill and making the uncomfortable comfortable. That's it. Again, just like with tying your shoes, riding a bike, or driving a car. Think back to those skills that you learned that now you don't even think about. When you learn them, You just kept practicing until you had the skill and the uncomfortable became comfortable. And so if you have been shying away from deliberate practice, it just means that you haven't been willing to be uncomfortable. That's it. That's really probably mostly what's been holding you back, and all the stories associated with that and all the limiting beliefs associated with that you allow yourself to buy into. What I will tell you, and I'll actually wrap up with this, having that big successful first webinar turned me into a voracious, deliberate practicer of new webinar strategies, concepts, etc., because I now had a big success, a significant win that I really bolstered my confidence and also bolstered my motivation, because I'm like, what else can I accomplish? How much better can I get? How much more money can I make with this? What you need to know is, long before you get to the ultimate goal, your North Star, just locking in and securing one milestone significant win through deliberate practice will bolster your motivation and your confidence to probably move towards your North Star with even more intensity and intention. You just got to get to that first milestone victory along your path to the North Star. And then you'll go from dragging yourself to actually kind of being pulled to it almost by the gravity of your North Star. All right? So, yes to habits, and you have to say yes to a deliberate practice where you're reaching outside of your current skill level and outside of your current comfort zone to actually see results in growth.